You're listening to Investify, preaching financial independence and assisting investors to achieve a more flexible and free lifestyle through smart financial planning and real estate investing. If leaving the corporate world and jumping into this thriving industry is what you desire, tune in and listen to stories of like-minded individuals who made the leap to financial independence. Equip yourself with the right tips and tricks to start your real estate journey, making active or passive ventures that are highly profitable and rewarding.
What's going on, everybody? You are listening to Investify. My name is Craig Curlop, aka the Fi Guy, and I am here with not Tiana, but Ian. Oh, see, we haven't got our game down yet. Ian Hameno. Look at that, dude. This is pure. This is in the flesh. That's
right.
Raw, unedited. Yeah. So, Ian, what's going on today, man?
Living the dream, dude. Every day, just a little bit closer to paradise, 1% better every day, and enjoying it as I go along. But I am deeply honored, but I know I can never fill the big shoes that Ziona has. Not literally, but figuratively. She's an amazing host, and I've been listening to you guys ever since day one. But nonetheless, I am honored to be here, man. Stoked.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here. Happy to have you on. So glad that you were able to kind of fill in. Of course, Ziona is amazing, but if you haven't already heard, she is going to be stepping down from the show, and so we love Ziona. But in the meantime, we're going to have some interim hosts here, interim co-hosts, to see who might possibly be able to fill Z Money's shoes. Anyway. That was deep.
Man.
This is a deep episode. This is a real deep episode. I think I just dropped that bomb on you. Yeah.
It's a really good transition. You have this bar set high as far as drama, intensity. And then Dan actually keeps that same intensity throughout the whole episode too. I loved it. It was such an awesome time.
Yeah, this episode's a little bit longer than some of our other ones, but you guys need to listen till the end, till the final four, because he's dropping gold and bomb, but he gets real deep and uncovers some serious stuff in the final four. And so, yeah, make sure you guys listen all the way through. We are gonna stop talking because this episode's a little bit long, and we're just gonna get Dan on the show. And Daniel Kwak, welcome to the show, my friend. How you doing today, dude?
That is the best intro I have ever received on any podcast, man. It's like when they introduced the UFC fighters, I like it, bro. And the pronunciation of the last name was on point. So congratulations. You are inclusive.
This must be the first podcast you've ever went on, huh?
Yeah.
Right. Awesome, Daniel. Well, hey, Daniel, I know you've got, you're a big real estate guy, right? You've got a following. Maybe some people who are listening already know who you are, but we want to take it way back. Take it back to those early days where Daniel Kwak maybe didn't have financial independence on his mind. What made that switch for you, and when was that?
Yeah, man, great question. And so my background is, my family and I immigrated to the United States from South Korea when I was just 5 years old, and we were poor is an understatement. We lived in one of those places where you flicker the light on and the cockroaches all, scatter to the outsides of the rooms. And, I liked going to school because I got to eat. So I remember, this is such a shady story, but I was 18 at the time. And my brother was like, hey, we got to go to this, real estate investing seminar. And, they were selling some ridiculously expensive course, right? And funny enough, I had a date actually scheduled that night. And so my brother and I shared a car. So it's my brother wanted to go to this seminar. I wanted to go on this date. And this girl was quite the looker, and people were like, how'd you get a date with her? I'm like, I don't know, magic, right? I have no idea. But long story short, I ended up going to the financial seminar. And, the reason why I enjoyed it so much is because for the first time in my life, somebody was actually able to answer the question of why my family grew up poor and why other families didn't. And so, and you start noticing things when you're a kid, you don't really realize you're poor, right? You don't really think about that, but you eventually get to middle school when you want to wear all the right shirts and all the, the right clothes. And, kids made fun of me for wearing the same clothes, week after week and not having the right brands. And, you kind of go to high school and you're like, you want to play sports and go to prom and do all these cool things. And then, you realize you don't have money to do that. And so that's really kind of the first time, was when I was 18, 19, my brother dragged me to the seminar and the guy in front of the room, and granted he was selling something, but I was like, wow, for the first time, I actually realized why I grew up the way I did and other kids in my high school didn't. So honestly, a lot of my financial literacy learning came from my curiosity of just, okay, I just need to know more about this world. And I always tell people, curiosity is the thing that gets you to stay up till 2, 3 a.m. in the morning and study something. And whereas something like passion will change every 3 to 5 years. So that's actually one of the tidbits I give to people, especially when they start a business, when they start an investing career or whatever what they want to do, or even like YouTube or a podcast, or they want to be a TikTok star, is share the things that you're curious about as opposed to the things that you think will make you a lot of money.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. And I love that you got curious at so young and you were willing to maybe be a little bit late for your date in order to go to the seminar. What was the seminar?
Well, I actually didn't go on the date at all.
I thought you were going to change your life and meet your wife in the same day.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. So I ended up going on. Didn't go on the date. I became what they call a Sigma male, right? I was becoming Andrew Tate before the guy even existed.
Yeah.
But so what's funny is crazy that you mentioned that is literally between the ages of 19 and 24, 25, because I got married when I was 25 to my wife now. Not that I've had other wives in the past, but during those 6-7 years, I didn't go out on Friday night. I could probably count on one hand the total times I went out to a bar or a club. The first time I was actually even at a bar or a club was when I was 25, and I was actually celebrating a close friend of mine. It was her birthday. She turned 21, so my wife and I went together. And on the drive over to the bar, I literally turned over and I was like, honey, I don't think I've ever been in a bar before. This is literally my first time. And so that was my life, man. I had no life.
I could picture Dan going up to the bar and do I pull a ticket to order a beer or something?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. How does this work, right?
I've done it at the deli before, but yeah.
Right.
I think most people are leaving bars when they're 25, not entering for the first time. I think that's when I stopped drinking.
I think so, right? That's when they're like, I gotta settle down, man.
Get my shit together.
Yeah, it was weird. I actually pretended to not speak English because I was like, I don't know what to do. So I have to I'm Asian, so I could pull that card, So I think I went up to the bartender and I just pretended to be a foreign exchange student, and I was like, hey, how do bars in America work? And so I kind of got away with that. But anyways,
that's so funny. The advantages of that, yeah.
That's right. It's what's the opposite of white
privilege. It's
what do they call
yellow
it?
privilege.
It's yellow privilege. I have yellow. That's right. I had yellow privilege. There you go.
I love that. I love it. Oh man, so at the seminar, was this a Rich Dad Poor Dad type seminar or no?
No. So it was one of the smaller real estate investing education companies, and their product was hey, you could pay I think it was $25,000 or something like that for a bunch of courses, right? Which, I teach real estate investing and I coach people, today on how to do it right. And it's very hard to learn just through courses. Yeah. But I remember I did anyways. And so, I was basically a man obsessed because this was a whole new world that I didn't even know existed. Mm-hmm. I had no idea about any of this stuff that, the financially literate people are actually able to, they know things that, others don't.
Yeah. And so you mentioned before that you went to the seminar and you figured out your why. Or you figured out the why as to why you grew up poor versus other people who grew up maybe wealthier or rich even. What was that?
Yeah. And there's a lot of different things that I think I can kind of rattle off. I can talk about how, a lot of rich, they tend to self-bank themselves. They have an internal financial ecosystem as opposed to a lot of individuals. And I won't say rich or poor, but a lot of people who may not be as financially literate or as financially efficient, right? Let's go with that terminology. So we don't get canceled, right? But a lot of the individuals who are financially inefficient, a lot of times they tend to have one income stream, and then that income stream goes right out the door. whether it be through bills, whether it be through, quote unquote expenses that they have, or right. So it's very one track, mentality. It's very linear. Whereas I realize with a lot of people who are more financially efficient, they're much more, I don't want to say complicated, but it's much more lucrative. There's more than just one thing, and it's just one input, one output. There's so many different avenues, but I'd say above all things, it was more so the mentality that people had. It was the mindset that people had towards money. And one of the things that I realized sitting there in that seat, because everybody else was like 50, 60 years old. One of the things I realized is like, hold on, like these people are learning about this stuff now. I wonder what my life would look like if I started learning about this stuff at 18, 19 years old. Like, I wonder what that would look like. And that's just a genuine question that I had. I was like, I wonder what it would look like I wonder how many people I could help. Because like ever since I was a kid, like I never had a fascination with like Lamborghinis or Ferraris. Like I never wanted to live in a giant mansion or drive a nice car. Like even to this day, I do really well for myself financially. And, I drive a Hyundai, right? Like my wife and I live in a townhome. Like we don't really, spend a whole lot of money. Like the moment I realized I was very happy to marry my wife was then she was like, yeah, I got this dress. Like I got a wedding dress on sale for like $180. And I was like, oh, that's just like, wow, what another reason like why I want to marry this girl, right? Because her and I both, like we have such a big purpose in our lives. Like she really wants to work with high school girls and college girls who are recovering from trauma and help victims of sex trafficking. We actually work with a nonprofit very close, we're in our neck of the woods. And I want to help people just in general, whether it be through, building hospitals in Africa or developing farmland in Africa, which is actually one of the projects that we're working on right now, or even just helping people have the transformation that I did, which is realizing, hey, like there's a whole new world that you have access to and learning about finances. And if you learn about that world, or even just the basics of that world, there's so many different things that you can do. So does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And especially looking at the big projects that you guys want to do with educating women that have been traumatized or have been in lower privileged areas and just had that upbringing. It's really unfortunate, but you wouldn't have had that opportunity or get that opportunity to help out these women if you don't have these multiple streams of income. If you just have one, you have to constantly work at it and constantly be active in that one source of income. So it's nice that you're realizing that at such a young age that like, hey, I need to supplement not only my lifestyle right now, but that future lifestyle. And how does that look when I help out like these women or like developing farmland in Africa? So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, one thing I always kind of come back to, what reminded Ian what you were saying and Dan what you were saying, is that like you kind of have to help yourself first in order to help other people, right? Like if you're not healthy, how can you possibly be a good husband or a good father or a good businessman, right? If you're not financially well off, how can you possibly help somebody else if you don't know where your next meal is coming from? And so you just have to like the basis of being able to help and make a difference in the world is to like make sure you're all set at a relatively young age. And that's like the power of financial independence. That's the whole purpose of this podcast and everything that I do. And I think everything that all three of us do is like hit your financial independence number ideally before you're 30, but at least before you're 40. And then you've got another you've got another lifetime ahead of you to really make an impact on the world.
Yeah.
And so, Dan, I kind of want to get back on track a little bit towards the like the real estate side of things. And so you went to the seminar at 19, and like how long did it take you before you actually made a move?
Man, it was a long time. And I'm glad, like in hindsight, and I'll kind of just connect your question to what we just talked about because it's really important. But one of the things that my mentor told me very early on, and he was like a baby boomer, right? And I think he's like 80 something now, but he had like 16,000 doors that he had owned and managed. And so he was a really successful guy. And one of the things he told me, and I'll never forget it, at 19 was, Daniel, don't be mad at yourself if you spend the next 3 years, which when you're 19, 3 years is a long time. Like that's like 15% of your life, right? But it's like, he said, don't get mad at yourself if you spend the next 3 years just simply learning. Because the fact of the matter is you can't pour from an empty cup. Mm-hmm. And if you try to pour from an empty cup, you actually end up doing more damage than good. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that really kind of just, concerns me, right? And I don't get mad about it or frustrated, but it is a genuine concern of mine. Is when I see a lot of younger folks, like older Gen Z, younger millennials, who haven't been through, as what my old mentor would say, they haven't been kicked in the nuts yet to know, right? Like and one of the things I learned very early on too is like there's no such thing as an undefeated entrepreneur. That does not exist. You can try, but everybody gets quote unquote kicked, right, once in a while. So to answer your question, it took me 3 years to do my first deal. And I was extremely frustrated. And there's actually one epiphany that I share often. So, the background knowledge to this story is that, I'm a man of faith. I'm a follower of Christ. And whenever I get really frustrated, I go to God for the answer, because who better, right? Who else is gonna know the answer than the big guy, right? So I remember I was 22 and I was just really frustrated because I had a lot of head knowledge. Like, I mean, with all the different classes that I was taking, different networking groups and real estate groups that I was a part of, I probably knew more about real estate than most people in every single room that I was in. But I made zero money. Like big old goose egg. Other people were making 6 figures, 7 figures, some 8 figures, whether it was flipping, wholesaling, or buying apartment complexes. And here I was, kind of not knowing anything. So I was frustrated, and God took me to this piece. Are you guys cool if I talk about the Bible, like just a little bit? Are you guys offended?
I'm a follower too, so yeah,
okay.
I love it. Yeah.
Awesome, perfect. You never know nowadays, right? People are like,
offended.
"Oh, that hurt my feelings," No. Yeah. And so I was taken to this passage in John chapter 13, and this is a story where the disciples and Jesus are walking into the Passover feast. So they're kind of entering this room. And as he's entering the room, Jesus has this like energy go through his body. And it actually says in the Bible that Jesus knew that the Father had put everything under his authority and that he was coming from the Father and was returning to the Father. There was a great quote. I don't know who it was by. It could be Morgan Freeman or Dr. Phil. I have no idea. Sorry. But there's a great quote that goes something along the lines of, if you want to test a man's character, you don't take everything away from him. You give him everything, and you see how he reacts. If you want to test a true man's character. I believe that quote is very exemplary in this situation, where Jesus knew that the Father had put everything under his authority, meaning that he's the most powerful being in the universe. Like, he's stronger than Iron Man, Thanos, Superman, Batman, Greta Thunberg, you name it, right? And so what Jesus does next, according to Scripture, is the next verse literally states, so he begins to remove his outer garments, brought out a basin of water, and begins to wash the feet of his disciples. Meaning that at the height of his power, Jesus chose to do the thing that was actually reserved for the lowest ranking servant at that time. So God took me to that passage, and he tells me, and it's like a knife in the heart. He goes, Daniel, I have engineered you to be extremely intelligent. You're a very smart kid. However, every single room you walk out of, the people's feet are still dirty. And he kind of communicated, unless you get that through your head, unless you can grasp that concept, I cannot allow you to be successful and bless your business. All right. So what I started doing, because I listened to something like that, I learned something like that, and for me, it's like, well, what do I do with that? I think a lot of times we live in a day and age where information is so fast and broad, and is that a lot of us understand the concept, but we don't know what that means practically for us. And we struggle, right? My generation, our generation really struggle with how that actually played out and what's good and what's bad. And so funny enough, I actually got like a notepad, and I started asking hundreds and hundreds of people in these different groups, hey, what's the number one obstacle you currently have in your business? And that kind of was what led to me doing my first transaction and scaling a business.
So that's amazing, man. And it's amazing what you can draw, from the Bible, from, whatever kind of source that you go to, because you can read that story a million times and a million different people will have a million different interpretations of it. Right. And so that's like the best part about it. But, getting back to kind of where you were at. And so were you of the mindset that, hey, you had so much knowledge that you almost didn't want to get down to do the dirty work because you knew that wasn't your highest dollar per hour task, right? You didn't want to scrub the feet. You didn't want to go pulling lists and making cold calls or whatever it is. And so is that kind of where your head was at? And then you were like, oh shoot, no, this is exactly what I actually need to do.
Yeah. No, great observation, man. I think I had the problem at the time that 99% of, especially young entrepreneurs have today, right? Like, we live in a day and age where you go on TikTok and you see these kids that are, starting drop shipping businesses, and they're supposedly making hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, right? Which, for me, I've been there and done that, right? Like, I kind of know what it takes to make hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, right? Because I've been through that process, and that's not it. What they're telling me, right? But it's really interesting because I think we live in a day and age where people don't struggle with learning and having more knowledge. I think people struggle with actually learning how to take that knowledge into an action step or a blueprint or a process. So I'll share a really cool story. So when I was 23. So by the time I had turned 23, I had my breakout year after that moment. So I ended up acquiring like 87 apartments in 1 year. It was a great year. And so that got the attention of a lot of different real estate investing education companies that wanted to almost have me be their billboard kid, right? And it also helped that I was a minority, right? Because like, it's like, that's a plus, it's not a minus for sure, right? So I started traveling around all these different countries. Like my travel schedule would be like 3-4 flights a week. I'd be in LA on, Wednesday, Minneapolis on Tuesday, like Seattle on Thursday, come back to Chicago on Friday, do another training. And so I started realizing as I started traveling for a lot of these groups that, the success rate was extremely low. Like it was like less than 1%. And I started asking people for months, and I was like, hey, like what is it like do you feel like is holding you back? Like, why are you not successful? You have clearly all the information. You clearly have the network. Like, what is it? And I learned after probably maybe 4 or 5 months, it was just people who were like, yeah, I have all the information. I feel like I just don't know what to do. And that's what I realized. That's what really separates the good entrepreneurs from the wantrepreneurs, is that the entrepreneurs have the ability to translate their SWOT, their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, but also more importantly, there are 4 currencies, which is, I always say there's 4, there's not one, there's money, there's time, relationships, and there's knowledge, right? They know how to convert those things into an actual blueprint that is clear, efficient, and constant. And if you can do that, then I think whether it's real estate, whether it's drop shipping, whether it's any business, I think people can be actually very quite successful if they just follow those things.
Super powerful, man. Yeah. And so is that kind of what happened with you then? Is that you basically like took all this knowledge and time and resource, all these things, and you went from like a 19-year-old, or I guess a 22-year-old know-it-all, to then a 24-year-old, 87 apartments and whatever it is?
Yeah, and there was actually a powerful moment. I still remember it to this day because I'm only 28. It wasn't that long ago, right? Back when I had hair, right? I remember this was like a New Year's party, and this was technically December 31st, 2016, right? So it's becoming 2017. And I was with my mentor at the time, and I told my mentor, it's like, hey man, I want to do 20 doors in 2017. And my mentor kind of just like sit there, like silently nodding. And then after a while, he was just like, Daniel, don't set goals, set standards and expectations. And so what happened was, and I didn't know he was telling me this, but I know now in hindsight that he was telling me to do exactly what we just talked about, which was it's not enough to have goals or just like you have to have a strategy that's constant, right? That's ongoing. And so what I did was I reverse engineered my goal of 20. I was like, okay, if I wanted to get 20 doors this year, what are the action items that I must complete consistently? And some of those action items included, well, if I want to get 20 doors, I got to raise the money because I don't have the money. I don't have the cash to buy it outright. So I got to raise the money. I got to find investors to invest in the deal with me. I have to have deals, right? Like I have to have actual deals that I'm looking at. And so I started creating what's called KPIs. So in business, there's things called leading indicators and lagging indicators. Most people focus 90% of their time on what's called a lagging indicator. A leading indicator are things that you can actually control. So you can actually control and say, hey, I'm going to spend 3 hours a week focusing and on getting deals, or I'm going to reach out to 2 potential new investors per month, right? So these are leading indicators, factors that you and I can actively have control over, change, shift, maneuver, adjust, etc. The lagging indicators are byproducts of you doing those things. So when people set goals or when people set out to do a business, and we all know the stat, right? Like within 5 years, like however, what's the percentage? Like people quit or something like that?
In real estate, after 5 years, 87% of realtors are no longer realtors.
Yeah, 87%, man. That's crazy, right? And by the way, if you're a realtor, this is the exact thing that you want to do. Because, one of the things I love about realtors is that there's no job security, nor should there be. Right? Like you got to go out and hunt and kill, man. Right? Like, and that's the beauty of it. That's like, I believe stuff like that is the purest form of capitalism because you eat what you kill. So if you're a realtor, your KPIs are probably going to look at something along the lines of, hey, I'm going to spend 3 hours a week with my marketing. And whatever deal channels I have, whatever ways I have access to find sellers, I'm going to identify 2 or 3 of the most efficient, most impactful, most productive ways for me to get in touch with sellers. And I'm going to spend 3 hours a week doing that. And one of the things I encourage, my coaching clients to do, the ones that I help acquire their first rental property, it's literally my company is called First Deal Mentor, right? We help people acquire their first deal, is I tell them, like, look, you got to get out your Google Calendar and you got to schedule 3 hours a week, like actually put it in your calendar. Because, they say that if you actually have it tangible, if you have it written out, you're more likely to actually do it. So, you put that in your calendar, you make sure it's committed and it's honored. No one can take away that time. And during those 3 hours, you're going to do the same thing every week after week after week. And then Darren Hardy wrote this book called The Compound Effect, which is, I always say the definition of success is just very simple little things that you do every single day, compounded over time. So one of the things I did was, hey, I'm gonna reach out to 2 new investors. So I ended up with 8 KPIs. I had 5 things I would do every single day, 2 things I would do every single week, and 1 thing I would do every single month to make sure that I was headed in the right direction. And my initial goal was 20. I used that goal to reverse engineer what my KPIs, my leading indicators are going to be. At the end of the year, I ended up with 87. Wow. So I more than 4x'd my goal because I focused more on the process and not the result.
Dude, what you're just saying right now is just total gold, right? If you go back and listen to the last 5 minutes of what Daniel was just saying, because
it's not gold, it's Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, depends on real estate, right? Yeah, for us.
That's right. Yeah, when you're
But it is serious. Like that, right? I'm a team leader of real estate agents, right? Ian over here is one of those agents. So one of the things that we always say is, hey, like you're not going to make 100 calls in a week and actually get any deals. But it's actually the 10th or 11th time that you call that person where is actually where the money lies, right? It's because how many people call them once or twice or 3 times, right? And no answer. But if you see that same damn number popping up on your phone every single day, you're like, what the hell does this person want? And then you're not trying to sell them the house right away. You're just trying to build a relationship, right? Yeah. And so focusing on the process and like almost becoming addicted to the failure and addicting to the no's and addicted to watching those numbers grow versus the results, I think is crucial.
Yeah. Well, and another thing too, man, is like, especially realtors, right? But really anybody in entrepreneurship or business, people don't do this enough where it's like, I mean, like when you fail or when you quote unquote have a low point or a rejection or whatever that is, that's such an opportunity to collect data. So like that's one of the things that I remind myself and my team of like every single week when we do our team calls. It's like, guys, look, like every single day when we're doing our KPIs, whatever, it's an opportunity for us to collect data and sharpen the sword. I think a lot of individuals, especially in the world of like, hey, it's all a numbers game, right? And it is, right? Like we have to have traffic, absolutely, 100%. But, one of the things that you mentioned, right, which is like, hey, it's all about the 9th call or the 10th call, right? Like you're collecting data. Like in my businesses, I know how many touches we need to get a sale, right? Like I know that for one of my companies, we need on average 2.5 experiences and touches that our potential client, our lead needs to go through before it's like the prime time to actually like pitch a product. So for realtors, right? And by the way, I love leadership. Like that's probably one of my favorite topics to talk about aside from Jesus. Like I love talking about leadership because it's literally the make or break for every single company or every single idea. But like to your point, right? Like that's the 8th call or the 9th call or 10th call. Well, if you collect that data and you start realizing that a majority of sellers on your team will actually do business with somebody on the 7th call, now you could actually have a brainstorming session on, hey, how do we make that process more efficient? How can we actually allow these sellers to go through 6 touches without our team having to waste any more time, or without our team having to do any of it, so that we can actually expound on that. So that's where a lot of innovation can happen, is when you start getting more data on what the problem really is.
Yeah, so I'm realizing that data is such an important part to this whole equation. Where I know when I first started my YouTube channel or social media following and creating these reels, I'm like, why am I not getting like hundreds of thousands of subscribers right now? Like, this is gold. Why am I not seeing this right now? And so I realized that more data, and after doing it for 6 months, a year, and more people start to talk about the channel, or it starts to happen organically. And going back to the lead versus lag measures too, the lead measures, I'm like, okay, I'm doing one podcast episode, I'm doing one long form video per week. So that's 2 videos per week. And I have to do it, and I have to increase the quality 1% better every week, And that is the lead measures that I'm determining myself on. And that's the only parts that I can control. The lag measures happen over time and organically, whether that's subscribers, view count, the referrals, or even just people picking up the phone and calling me versus me calling them. It's such a good way to understand, like, it's data that really helps you progress the business going forward.
I just had this thought, and it could be total BS, and so because I literally just hadn't thought it through. But what I'm kind of realizing right now is that lag measures are really just bragging rights, right? Like, you're at the gym and you brag to people how much you bench, right? But you're not bragging to people that you've been to the gym 6 days a week and working on the bench press, right? Or like, you're bragging to people how many followers you have, which is a lag indicator, not that it took you 3,000 videos to get 5,000 followers, right? Because that's so much less sexy is the lead indicators. And so I think that is actually true, what I'm saying now, even as I say it. And so, like, focus on the thing that's not sexy, because the sexy thing will make you go poor, and the not sexy thing will actually make you get rich, is how I'm viewing it.
No, there's a quote that I absolutely love, and I share it with, like, my clients, my students. Like, I mean, I try to share it on as much podcasts as I can, but sometimes it just gets, back there in the head. But there's a quote, again, I don't know who it's by. I'm really bad, by the way, at remembering.
We'll say this one's Morgan Freeman.
This one's Morgan Freeman. That's exactly right. Specifically the Morgan Freeman from the Redemption movie, whatever.
Shawshank.
Bruce Almighty.
I really forget the title.
Shawshank. Yeah, Shawshank.
Bruce Almighty. There you go. Perfect. Evan Almighty. Or Bruce Almighty. And so the quote kind of goes something along the lines of, like, to have what you've never had, you got to do what you've never done, learn what you've never learned, but most importantly, be who you never have been. And I think when people want the byproducts of entrepreneurship, which is like passive income, like, it might be that guy who has, like, the Instagram post of him on a yacht with, like, a bunch of girls, and and, like, he's like, hey, be the change that you want to see in the world, right? Like, as a caption. But quite honestly, like, probably the most successful entrepreneurs that I know, they focus 90% of their time on the leading indicators, and it's not even close. Like, especially the ones that are able to lead well and pivot well, like that's how they do it, is they focus more on the process and their team and what the data that they're collecting more so than anything else. And it's like weird, they consider the leading indicators to be sexier than the lagging ones. It's like the weirdest thing.
It's a mindset shift, right? It's just like the whole mindset shift of, hey, actually driving a beat up Hyundai and living in a townhome, despite the fact that you make hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars a year, is actually way cooler to, like, maybe people on this call. But if you go to the general public and share where you live or what you drive, people are like, I don't give a shit what this guy does, right? He's driving a Hyundai.
Well,
right?
it's funny that you mentioned that, because, like, my wife and I were literally having this conversation last night. So, like, my sister-in-law, she's a special ed teacher, which God bless her heart, right? I mean, she's got such a genuine, kind heart, but like, her and her fiance, they just have a very interesting view on money, right? A lot of the things that I personally wouldn't agree with. But, like, my wife and her were having a conversation, and like, she was talking to them about some financial thing, whatever, and one of a guy, or I'm sorry, so one of the guys that work for me just announced that he's having a baby with his wife, right? And so they found out it was just recently a boy, and we celebrated. I was super happy because he's a lot like my little brother, right? Like, I see him like that. And so my wife was talking to her, and then the topic of money came up, and it just got brought up that the guy that works for me makes about $250,000 a year. And my sister-in-law's like, holy cow, that's so much money. Yeah. Like, oh my gosh, like making $250,000, that's insane. And so she kind of goes, wait, so this guy works for Daniel. How much does Daniel make, right? And it kind of reminded me of the idea that, like, wow, like, myself and a lot of my peers, right? Like, we really don't care about the lagging indicator. We don't really care about that money, that we're making. For us, like, I have a blast, like, just being in my office, being on this podcast with you guys, sharing what I've learned over the years of me being on this journey. And I just love it. Like, I was talking to my wife, Lisa, and her and I are just like, honestly, like, I think we just like being here in the office. Like we actually, I just called my assistant like this morning and I was like, hey, that Cancun trip that Lisa and I are doing, can you actually shorten it by 3 days? Just because I actually don't want to like I don't really find a lot of joy in something like that, you know? So anyways, I didn't mean to go off on a little tangent, but I just wanted to reiterate your point of, you know, like just focus 90% of your time on the process and learn to enjoy, like learn to be really curious about this journey.
Those times that you really get kicked in the nuts are the times that I really respect you. You know, you've been through the trials and tribulations of being an entrepreneur, starting a business, and you don't learn that stuff by just winning. You have to get into the dirt and get your teeth dragged in the mud, right? And it's just, it says so much about a person knowing that they've gone through all that and have still succeeded and still keep humble with a Hyundai as well.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, it's the Hyundai in the townhome is it would actually help your success, right? Because if you had all these other payments dragging you down, right? A lot of people maybe don't see that, but cool. Yeah. Daniel, well, I mean, your story, man, is incredible, right? Again, going from a 19-year-old who didn't know anything, missed out on a date with a girl, which honestly, I'll admit, and I probably would have picked the girl, but you were smarter than that. And
I would have too. It wasn't for my brother,
you
honestly.
should be giving your brother a high five for sure. But you know, it took you 3 years though, and 3 years is a long time, man. Like 3 years ago, what year was it? 2000 and like early 2019. Like I only had two properties at that time. It's just before COVID, right? Like it's crazy how long 3 years actually is. And so I think it's Tony Robbins who says people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 5. And I think that quote right there, like just that one got me good, and it hit me at the right time where I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna go all out for 5 years. And I'm way past anywhere I thought I would be 5 years ago. And I think that is the same for literally everybody. But it's cool how you took 3 years to educate yourself, sharpen that axe. You started chopping down trees at age 22 or 23. You picked up 87 rentals. You raised money. You underwrote deals. You must have built a company because I know you didn't do all that all yourself. And so, and again, this might be another podcast for another time, but like, where are you, I guess, so after you bought your units, right, your 87 units, were you done or were you still building more real estate, or did you decide to venture into something else? Like what happens next?
Yeah, I actually retired. I'm actually on a beach right now. You know,
is that Cancun behind you?
Holographic. Yeah. That's right. It's open AI. I'm not even real, right? It's a AI person talking to you. No, so one of the things I've always wanted to do ever since I was a kid was buy businesses. I've always wanted to get into scaling businesses, buying businesses. And so, you know, when we had, you know, bought our last apartment, you know, my brother and I kind of looked at each other, and, you know, he had built a successful marketing agency at the time as well. So I was doing the real estate while Sam was focusing on our marketing. And the marketing thing, you know, I always say you got to have your rabbits and elephants, right? Like the real estate thing was our elephant. That was our big project. If we kill it, we get to eat for a whole year, right? But you got to have your rabbits, the things that feed you on a day-to-day basis. Like I see way too many young entrepreneurs that are in their 20s and in their late teens where, you know, they're not able to sustain themselves financially because they're trying to work on this giant elephant. And sometimes the elephant doesn't work out. You know, they don't know how to tackle the elephant. And what they miss, and I was just having lunch with the young guy recently, and we were talking about this, and like a lot of times what you miss by not having the rabbits is you miss the ability to go to different mastermind events. You miss the ability to go to different workshops, to go to conferences, the things that I would encourage any 19, 22, or 30, you know, or 23-year-old to do is to go out there to as many events as you possibly can and meet and shake hands with as many people as you possibly can as well. So, you know, you kind of miss that, right? So we were having our rabbits and elephants at the time. The rabbit was the marketing agency. The elephant was the big real estate thing. And, you know, this was 2018, I think, early 2018 when we did our last, you know, real estate deal or during that season of life. And we were just kind of, all right, well, like, what do you want to do now? You know, like real estate prices are starting to climb up. And, you know, we thought the crash was going to happen, you know, around that time. And so we started getting into scaling a business. So we started a business where we help American families pay off their mortgage faster using a simple interest line of credit. Because, you know, for those guys that know, amortization is what kills the average American wealth. If you ever look at what's called a truth in lending statement, I think a lot of people will be very angry at what it's actually happening with her mortgage. You know, like that first payment, it's like 75% interest that bank literally just puts in their pocket. And people don't know how to mitigate that. Like, you know, so we have clients that save like 50, 75, $80,000 on interest, just literally using our program, using our softwares and our tools. So we started that company. We scaled it. Now that company is doing really, really well. And then, you know, we kind of figured it out, right? We figured out the process on how do we actually, you know, create a company? How do we actually hire a team? How do you scale an offer? How do you, you know, run sales funnels and processes and tighten everything up and then build company culture? And so we started just rinse and repeating that process. So we started that company. We started a real estate investing education company. And then we started passively investing into other businesses as well, from everything from, you know, I've got a couple of e-commerce companies, and we just, you know, we invested into a board game company 2 years ago. That's like giving us 37% return every year, which is nuts. But you know, we were able to kind of, it was really neat. I've had a lot of fun over the last, you know, 4 or 5 years of just buying into different companies and just giving them advice on how to scale it, how to make it more efficient, how to increase bottom line revenue, and all these things. So that's kind of what I've been up to. Now I'm actually back into real estate. So we're actually looking to purchase large apartment complexes, self-storage facilities. And then I got a couple other passion projects I'm working on, like the stuff in Africa and different stuff like that. So yeah, man, I'm just focused today on helping people, which by the way is my definition of true leadership, is helping people be the best versions of themselves and giving them the platform to do that. I have a couple mentors of mine. You know, one mentor runs a $17 billion company and owns a sports team. I won't tell you which sports team, but he owns an NBA team. I'll give you that. And, you know, he's probably the most humble dude in the world. I mean, he's just very, very humble. You would never think that he's who he is, right? But one of the things that he told me that really kind of just hit me and it stuck with me is that the best CEOs that I've met, Daniel, are the ones who know how to get out of the way for their team to do well. And that hit me because I've heard story after story of how CEOs feel like they need to be the guy with all the answers. They need to be the smartest guy in the room. And based on my observation of hanging out with my mentors today, every single one of them is like, no, like I want to be the guy who gathers all the smart people in one room, creates a platform for them to be really successful. And then after I've done that, constantly checking in on them and going, hey, what do you need? What can I do to help? How can I help you be the best version of yourself? So, I mean, another great example is, you know, I had lunch recently. I had a 2-hour lunch with my mentor, Joe Vranken. So he used to be the CEO of a company called Topgolf. Oh, yeah. And then now he's the CEO of a company now called Putt Shack. So what's really cool is that when he took over Topgolf, I think they were like a $30 million company. And then when he left 5 years later, they were valued at like $2.7 billion. So, I mean, this guy really knows what he's doing. And, you know, one of the things that he tells me all the time is just, you know, like my job is literally just to help people be the best version of themselves and support them, put out fires and help them succeed and create the platform to be able to do that. So, I mean, even for you guys and for people in general, whether you're leading a group of realtors, whether you're leading a $2 billion company, that principle is always the same. And when you're an entrepreneur, you're starting out, that starts with you asking yourself, how do I put myself in the best position to succeed? And how do I be the best version of myself?
Yeah, that's so good. That leadership position that really speaks to you, Dan. But with having a CEO getting out of the way and getting the smartest people to congregate and let them do their thing, it also leaves you to do the things that you want and live the life that you want as well. So I think it's a win-win situation here where you could build the lifestyle that you want and also build the company that you want at the same time. So I think, you know, your mentors definitely have the right idea of like, how do we let this flourish without needing me at the same time? So that's really good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Daniel, there's one thing that you're picking up, I'm picking up a lot on from you and who's made the most impact in your life is really the relationships and the mentors and the mentees even in your life. And so if someone's listening to this and they don't have a mentor, like what do you recommend? Like how does one find a mentor? How do you get in the same room as the owner of the NBA Clipper, whatever the Los Angeles Clippers or whatever the hell, right? whoever the guy is, right?
Sure.
Yeah. And so like, how do you get,
Yeah, honestly, and like, so I had a therapist for 3 years, and I probably had her between maybe 2000, 2018 to 2021. And one of the things I've learned, because when I was young, I always gravitated towards like having male mentors in my life, and having male role models, and I always gravitated towards that. And I realized that during my time of going to therapy, it's actually because I had a pretty negative relationship with my father, which was why I was seeking a lot of male leadership and male role models. And so I learned how, like very early on, to have mentors and do all of these good things, but I was actually doing it from a very unhealthy place. It's because my relationship with my dad wasn't conclusive, right? There was no resolution, which, thank goodness, praise God, since then there was, right? Like my dad and I have had a lot of conversations about, hey man, you did that thing that it really hurt me. Like, and it's just interesting because it humanizes your dad almost, right? And you realize, you learned like, oh wow, like my dad is actually just like me. He's a human being who's just trying to do his best. And so there's a lot of forgiveness and resolutions that's happened between us, thankfully. But the point remains the same. It's because I didn't have the greatest relationship with him, or is actually almost non-existent. That led me to finding a lot of male role models. So I say that because I want people to find mentors, because it's literally a hack. Like, if you find someone who's 30, 40 years ahead of you, they can literally tell you all the mistakes that they've made. And, one of my favorite questions to ask a mentor, which I recommend everyone do, is ask a mentor, hey, what would you do if you were me? Because that puts the mentor in a situation where they now have to ask clarifying questions to figure out where you're actually at so that they can give you the best advice. A lot of people are just like, hey, I just want to hang out with the mentor. I just want to do this. I just want to do that. And for me, as someone who's mentored a lot of young entrepreneurs, one of the things that's really frustrating for me is when somebody has a question for me and they don't really know what they want, and they don't really know what they're looking for, or they're just asking me a question because they know it's the right thing to do, and I kind of know that they're not going to execute. Like that for me is kind of the biggest pet peeve of mine. But if you ask that question, now all of a sudden the mentor can give you a clear piece of advice. Now there's parameters and details and a context to where someone can give you the best advice possible, as opposed to someone just coming up to me, go like, hey, Daniel, how do I start a business? Mm-hmm. Or like, hey, Daniel, how do I raise capital? Or hey, Daniel, how do I find deals? Well, it's like, well, like it depends, right? Like there's so much more context and details that need to be added. So it's almost like help me, help you. So I'd say that's a really good, I say piece of nugget if once you find a mentor to really develop that relationship with them. But in terms of how you find them, I honestly, for me, man, it was trying to put myself in the best positions possible. So I'd go to networking events, I'd go to conferences, I would ask people that I knew successful people. So I'd go to what I call centers of influence, whether that was like a church pastor, whether whoever, and I'd say, hey, Pastor Mark or Pastor Steve, I just recently started a real estate investing business. Would you by any chance happen to know anyone that you feel like would be good to mentor me? Someone who's been really successful. That's actually how I met my mentor, Joe, who used to be the CEO of Topgolf. And he's probably one of the primary mentors in my life for the last 5-6 years. And I met him through my church pastor, Like my pastor literally came up to me one day. He's like, hey man, you've been talking a lot about business and entrepreneurship. Like I should introduce you to Joe. He's come to our church a couple of times. I've developed a great relationship with him. I think you guys will hit it off. And we did. We met at a Panera. We were at our first meeting and we were there probably 2.5, 3 hours. And I was just sharing my story. I was like, yeah, man, this is where I come from. This is what I hope to learn. Thank you for spending the time. Right. And most mentors, if you're humble, like that goes a long way. If you have a great attitude and you're humble, I think a lot of people will be surprised how many people that are quote unquote unreachable are willing to help somebody that's humble and has a great attitude.
Absolutely. And I think everybody's out there and genuinely wants to help. I mean, look at the three of us, right? We all want to help people underneath us. So why isn't someone above us wanting to reach down and help us out, right? And I feel like we're spitting out a lot of quotes today, but another one came to mind from Ben Franklin, right? Where he says, if you want to make a friend, ask them to do you a favor. Right. And that's a great way to make a friend. But like you just said, Daniel, where you need to help them help you. Right. And so basically by saying, hey, I have one specific question, you can answer this question in 3 seconds or less. And now, it's an easy thing. But I'm sure we all get DMs on Instagram and stuff all the time. And sometimes there's these big, long messages. And I'm just like, I don't feel like reading all that. So I'm not going to answer it. But if you ask me a one-line question, I get back to every single person that asks me a 1 or 2 part question And so, yeah.
Right, or not even that, but it's like you would probably mentor somebody more likely if you had somebody that was really close in your life and they kind of just vouched for them, right?
absolutely.
They're like, "Hey, Craig, you gotta meet John, man. John's this young kid. He's bright. He's hungry. He's humble. And I think he could learn a lot from someone like you. I mean, you would probably 99% of the time." Or maybe even 100% of the time, because you seem, you're a great guy from what I'm getting. Like you'd probably agree to do a lunch or do coffee or do breakfast. Like if somebody came to you and says, "Hey, like you should meet this kid. This guy's awesome."
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially if it comes from somebody that I know, right? Of course.
Yeah.
Daniel, dude, this has been honestly, like, I think one of my favorite episodes that we've done. And so I just want to say thanks so much for coming on. Of course, we're not done yet. We are going to be heading into the final four. But before we get there, do you have any last words of wisdom you want to drop to our listeners?
Yeah, one of the things that I've been learning a lot about recently is the power of self-identity. So, there was a study that was done with a bunch of addicts, right? And I don't remember what the addiction was. I think it was either between meth or pornography. They're two entirely completely different things. But it was, I just remember reading a white paper. It was a research paper that was done actually by a pretty large school of psychology. And the paper that was indicating was that the individuals who were addicted to substances or pornography or whatever it may be were actually more inclined to get out of that addiction and overcome that addiction if they gave themselves a new identity. So instead of saying, "Oh, like I'm trying to stop doing meth," or I'm trying to stop watching porn, instead, if you tell yourself, "Hey, I'm an individual that doesn't do that stuff." If you actually brand yourself as an identity of going, "Hey, I'm a person that doesn't do meth. I'm a person that doesn't do crack," right? Like if you came up to me and they're like, "Hey, Daniel, what do you think about crack?" Like I'm gonna be, I don't know, I don't have any experience with it. Like that's my identity, right? Like I'm an individual that doesn't smoke crack, right? So when you're an entrepreneur and you're an aspiring entrepreneur, or even if you're a realtor, one of the things I encourage people to do is start thinking of yourself as a successful realtor, and kind of ask yourself, what does a successful realtor do? So I mean, even for me, it's like I always tell myself, like, "Hey, I'm a great leader," and my action items and my thoughts and my ability to want to get better aligns with my identity. Because for me, I know that great leaders are constantly learning. They're humble. They always keep their ego in check before their ego checks them. I know they do a lot of these fundamental things, and so for me, because I associate myself and I identify myself as that, I don't say, "Oh, I got to do this or I got to do that." Right? It's just part of who I am. So for me, it's like to work sometimes 8, 9, 10, 4, like I did yesterday, I did a 14-hour day. Like for me, that's I'm not going to bed and be like, "Oh my gosh, I worked so hard. That was rough." Right? For me, it was like, no, that's just part of who I am as a leader who's passionate about his purpose and the mission that God has given him to accomplish in this world. Like that's part of it. That's part of my identity. That's just who I am.
Dude, I love that, man. I think I've heard something like that before once. I think it was in Atomic Habits. Have you read that book, Atomic Habits? I'm sure everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, Charles Duhigg, great book.
No, it's James Clear. Charles Duhigg is the
I'm sorry. Oh my gosh, James,
Morgan
my
Freeman
bad,
wrote
my
it,
bad.
actually.
Wow,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, no,
embarrassing.
it's okay.
Yeah, it was Morgan Freeman or Kanye or something like that,
yeah.
right?
But I've heard that like with a smoker, right? I used to have a good friend of mine that smoked, and I always was trying to kind of get her to quit. And I was like, I realized the difference between you and I is that like I'm not a smoker. I'd never smoked a cigarette in my life, and like she, however, was addicted, and so like she sees a pack of cigarettes on the bureau at home, and that like triggers something. Like I want to smoke a cigarette. To me, it's like it could be a pair of socks for all that matter. It has nothing it has nothing for me, and so I think like just rejigging your brain to get on the things that you need to do.
Yeah, and a lot of it, man. And to your point, a lot of it has to do with like, man, like who are you spending time with? Like, what are you consuming your mind with? Like that has a lot to do with it. Like part of the reason why I think it's so easy for me to identify myself as a leader is because a lot of times I listen to podcasts and read books that a good leader would read. As opposed to like I'm not spending 3 hours a day watching The Voice or like Law and Order or CSI, right? Like a good leader, in my opinion, doesn't do that, right? And I'm not saying like, hey, like I do believe people need to learn how to rest. Like, I do believe that, right? Like, we need to have things on the daily that, clears our minds and allow us to rest and allow us to relax and have fun, right? Like, that's one of the things my wife taught me is you got to have fun, Daniel. You can't just be in the office every day for 12, 14 hours, right? Like, you got to learn to have fun. You got to enjoy. You got to watch a movie once in a while. And absolutely, right? Because a lot of times, like, me being a good leader means being a great husband first. Or, for me, being a great leader always involves me being a great follower first. That's one of the things, like, that actually for me, for a lot of individuals out there listening that may already have a team, that for me is actually a strong litmus test on whether or not someone makes a good or a bad leader is, are they willing to follow? And do they do that well? Like, all the best leaders I know, from the guys, the CEOs, the chairman of the boards running, not 9-figure companies, not 10, I'm talking 11-figure companies. Those guys always follow somebody first, whether it be God, whether it be Jesus, or a mentor of their own, right? Like, the greatest leaders I know are constantly following something, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense.
You need your kind of North Star, something to go towards. I totally agree. All right, dude, more bomb strapped. But now we seriously have to get into the final part of the show.
All right, man.
Which is
Final four.
Final four. The final four. Clearly choreographed. Yeah. All right, Ian, kick us off.
Yeah. Dan, what book are you reading right now?
So I'm reading currently 2 books. So there's one called A New Kind of Diversity. I don't know who the author is. I completely forgot, but we're going through it as a leadership team. And another book that I'm currently reading is actually by a guy named Glenn Murray, who's one of my spiritual mentors, called Uncommon Thoughts About Common Beliefs. And if you're a believer, I would highly, highly recommend you read that book.
Love it. All right, Daniel, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh man. This is great. So, and this is more so for, my faith orientation. But someone told me, it was actually the person, it was what we call the Holy Spirit, told me that my only responsibility isn't to be a great husband. It's not to be a great leader. It's not to be a great businessman. My only responsibility in life is just to be a follower of Christ. That's it.
Love it, man. With that being said, I know you sort of touched on it a little bit in the episode, but what is your why?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, people asked Jesus that question 4 times throughout the Gospels, right? There was Pharisees that asked it, there was some disciples who asked it, and they were like, why are you here, man? And every single time Jesus answers the question with, I'm here to do the will of the one who sent me. Some variation of that answer. So a lot of people are like, if you ask a random person walking down the street, it's like, hey man, what's your purpose? Most people will kind of just say something along the lines of, well, I haven't really thought about it, but it's something along the lines of helping people, right? And then you look at their actual action items and you look at their actual behaviors and thoughts, and you start realizing that most people, at least 95% of them, actually tend to live a quite selfish life. Especially for the individuals who, if you think of the average American, like 9-to-5 worker, like how often do they truly leave an impact on somebody else? Most people are very selfish. I think we saw that with the toilet paper shortage that happened in 2020. But most people are like that. So what I love about that is for Jesus, it wasn't like, oh, it's to die on the cross. If it was his purpose to die on the, which it was part of it, right? But his purpose was mainly to bring the kingdom of God, is to set the captives free, as it says in Isaiah. But if Jesus' only purpose was to die on a cross, he would have been born as a 33-year-old. He wouldn't have been born as a baby in Bethlehem, completely vulnerable, and had 3 years of ministry before he got nailed to that cross. So what I love about Jesus' answer is his purpose is the KPI. It is the action item. It is the leading indicator, which is to simply do what God asks him to do every single day. So, my challenge for a lot of people, especially that's listening to this podcast that are believers, and it doesn't matter if you're a believer, if you could be Muslim or Hindu or whoever, right? But for me, as a follower of Christ, my challenge to people is like, man, what would life look like if you lived in a way where every single business meeting you walked into, you knew that Jesus was walking ahead of you? Or every podcast you did, you knew Jesus was right there in the room with you. Every conversation you have with your son or your daughter, Jesus was right there having that conversation, right? Like, what would that look like to us? Like when you're driving down the road in your car on your way to the office, for you and Jesus, spend some time hanging out, and he's in the passenger seat. Like, what would that look like? And for me, I love the fact that God has an agenda that's more important than my own. Like one of the things that I ask a lot of, faith-oriented Christian entrepreneurs, it's like, hey, who wants God in their business? And almost everybody raises their hand, right? They're like, oh, I want God to be in my business because I know that business is going to be blessed and whatever. And I ask the question, well, who wants to be in God's business? And, that's one of the things that God really convicted me of, about 2 years ago. He's like, hey, Daniel, you always ask me to be in your business, but when are you going to be in my business? And I've got a business. My business is, it's called helping my kids in my world know who I am and realize how much they're loved by me, because that is God's business, and it's a family business and he's inviting all of us to be in it. So for me, I say I've got a business, yes, but I'm in God's business first. And that business is helping his kids know who he is and how much they're loved by him, a loving father. That is so important because then I can conduct my business in a way where it's like, man, how can I show up for Ian and Craig? How can I love them well? How can I, add value and be the best version of myself so I can serve their audience and the people listening to this podcast right now? And I think if you do that, a lot of, you attract a lot more people than you would think.
Yeah, man, I love everything you're saying right now. It's super powerful. I think that exercise of having Jesus with you in the car seat, in the room, in the office with you by yourself. And it's more than just like, of course, you're going to do the things that he's asking you to do. But think about the things that you're afraid of doing, right? And so some people, it's getting on the phone. Yeah. Some people, it's hopping on the podcast, right? And it's like, if Jesus was here in this room with you, what would he think if you were afraid to make phone calls or if you were afraid to hop on a podcast or like imagine if in the Bible, Jesus decided that he didn't want to, he didn't want, I can't think of anything right now, but like if he didn't want to make the phone calls, right? Like, would that be a leader? If someone was afraid to make phone calls or someone was afraid to hop on a podcast, like, no, you'd be like, that's not the person that you want to follow. So like, be that person that people want to follow and actually get in the weeds and like do the things. And so, Dan, such good stuff that you're saying, man.
Well, real quick, man. There's a quote by Henry David Thoreau that says that God will not have his will be manifested by cowards. And I find that to be so powerful because you're absolutely right. Like Jesus was not a coward, I mean, he knew who he was and he knew the things that he had to do and he stepped up to the plate, but it's because he was acting out of love and not fear. 95% of entrepreneurs, realtors, salespeople, a lot of them act based on fear. And what is fear? Fear is what's good for me. It's self-promotion. It's self-elevation. Well, what is love? It's others focus. It's other promotion, other elevation. And, our society, man, we messed up the word love. And a lot of this whole self-love stuff, man, like I understand the whole idea of taking care of yourself and allowing you to be the best version of yourself. But let me be really clear. I do that so that I can pour into everybody else. Because I know that since God pours into me, I can overflow into the people around me. So, you can either, again, with the gifts that God has given you, you can either act based on fear, or you can act based on love. It happened. Perfect example is, two people. There's David and there's Saul, right? In fact, when you look in scripture, if you read in the Old Testament, God clearly gives Saul and tells Saul, hey, dude, you're the next king of Israel. But when it came time for the prophet, which I believe at the time was Samuel, correct me if I'm wrong. It was either Nathan was later on. It was probably Samuel. But I don't know what the prophet is. But when it came time for Samuel to gather all the leaders of the tribe of Judah and introduce Saul as the new king, the dude was hiding. He actually hid in a wine cellar because he was afraid, and he was acting based on fear. Whereas with someone like David, same thing happened. God anoints him, right? Samuel anoints the son of Jesse, anoints him as the new king of Israel. And when it came time, the guy acted out of love and not fear because he knew that God loved him and that he had the anointing on his forehead, and he stepped to the plate, slayed a giant, and destroyed nations, on behalf of the word, right? On behalf of God. So for me, the question is, well, what are you going to be? Are you going to be a Saul or are you going to be a David? And so for exactly your point, Craig, I mean, there's realtors out there who are like afraid to make calls, man. And it's like, well, what if, the next person that you were going to call needs your services? What if they're in a situation where they really need to sell this house? And, what if there's a buyer out there who really needs to buy that house? And because you didn't make the phone call and you acted based on fear, that's not happening, So again, I don't want to guilt trip people into be like, hey, you got to work 12, 14 hours a day. However, I do believe in acting out of love. I do believe in
Yeah,
that.
that's super powerful, man, dude. So I love how deep we're going here too, and this is great. Um, I'm gonna give you our last question, which is maybe deep depending on how you look at it. But which would you prefer to have as your roommate, a goat or a bird?
Easy,
Bird.
bird. Totally.
Why?
Because, well, I mean, if I had the goat, I'd be really tempted to eat it. Not, not because I'm from a country that eats different animals, right?
Well,
I love. Right? It's like I didn't want to make that assumption, but you know, it'd be really funny if you're like goat or bird. I'm like easily dog.
Yeah.
That'd be super funny. But so my wife and I recently we've been really getting into Indian food, and so I love like goat curry.
Yeah.
So I think if I had a goat as a pet, I'd be like, all right, man, I'm starting to get a little hungry, and and so I'd say bird. I feel like birds are easier to take care of. It's like, I don't know.
For sure.
I say bird. Let's go with
All
bird.
right.
Goats eat
Ian, what would you
everything
say?
too. I mean, goats eat everything too. I mean, especially as a roommate, that's
right.
a lot of real estate dedicated to the goat. You can't have nice things. They have the zoomies too. I mean, bird's kind of cool. Yeah, like a parakeet or something, or even a macaw. That'd be kind of cool. Someone to talk to,
Yeah.
Man.
Well, when you say goat, are you talking about the animal or like Michael Jordan or like Tom
No,
Brady?
no. I mean, I would love to be roommates with Tom Brady or Michael Jordan, but no, I mean
That'd be
a
so
good old
fun.
Billy Goat. Honestly, I'm
man.
picking.
That's right.
Call me crazy. I'm picking the goat, man. I want that milk.
He's going
I want
with the
that
goat.
milk. I
All
want
right.
that goat cheese. Yeah,
Ooh.
that's that good. But all right, Daniel. Again, man, thanks so much for your time. Thanks so much for coming on.
It was an honor,
where can
guys.
people?
I had a
Yeah, I had
blast.
so much fun too, man. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so I have a personal Instagram that I never post on, but like I post stories of like kind of things I do throughout the day, I guess. But I like to give away a lot of free things. I'm a South Korean Oprah, as you could say. So we have a free meetup that we do every other Tuesday, and we also have I started a podcast of my own called The First Deal Experience. So that's where I get a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners and just people I really admire, and I just ask them to come on and just talk about their very first deal. And so it's just, pretty much entrepreneurs and business owners sharing really cool stories, because that's just something I genuinely enjoy. And I do that anyways, regardless if there's a mic or a camera. So it's called The First Deal Experience. You can look it up on anywhere, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. But I also do a free real estate investing meetup every other Tuesday. So if you want to learn more about that, you can just go to thekwakbrothers.com. And then there's, a lot of information on there that you can kind of just scope around and see. So I think it was an honor being here, guys. I had a blast. This was really fun.
Is that meetup in person or is it online?
Oh, it's virtual, so that anyone can
cool.
attend. Yeah, and I talk about all the stuff from like raising capital to how to find great deals to underwriting, and it's free. It's completely complimentary, and we usually go on for about an hour. And a lot of people say that they get a lot of value out of it. So, yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, Dan, thanks so much for coming on. Check out thekwakbrothers.com. Check out that meetup. Check out your YouTube, your Instagram, all the good things. And man, we'll be in touch soon. So thanks again, man. We'll see you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, guys.
Later, dude. And that was Daniel Kwak. Ian, what'd you think of Daniel?
Oh my gosh. So I mentioned at the later part of the episode that I've been following these guys, Sam and Dan, for a long time on YouTube. Big fan of the work, and I love what they're doing with their channel, especially outside of it too. And I just enjoyed having that conversation with him, like as a person, and hearing about his upbringing and going into how he is now. He's kept his values very aligned with what his business is like. I absolutely loved it, Craig. So yeah, man, what'd you think? This is probably your first time talking with Dan too, yeah?
Yeah, this is my first time talking to Dan, and honestly, I did not know who Dan was before this episode, but I am extremely, extremely impressed with everything that he's built, with how much he's grown, with how much he's been able to take the advice of others, and kind of that rags to riches type story, which I think everybody loves to hear.
Yeah.
And he's got so much knowledge and so much wisdom, and he's willing to share it. You can tell that he lives in such an abundant mindset, and that has just paid off for him in troves. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting to know Daniel a little bit better and to have him, maybe come back on the show, because heck, he was so interesting. We hardly even talked about real estate, right? Like we talked, I mean, it's crazy how we went from like 0 deals to 87 apartment complexes in a year, which we never even got into. But I just think at some level, it's just like, holy crap, he built like a machine to do that. Like he needed deal acquisition, he needed money raising, he needed deal underwriting, he needed management. Like there's a lot of things that go into creating a multifamily business, and he was able to crush it. And of course, if he can do that, then he can probably build any business, and that's kind of where he's headed now. So amazing.
When you have a why as strong as Dan's, and when you come from a place like South Korea where, like he said, you turn on the lights and the cockroaches flee. I mean, it's hard to stay humble it's hard to not stay humble and realize that you've come so far along the way. And all he does is he just wants to help people, especially with where he's at right now and wanting to develop, or currently working at it, developing a class for like first-time home buyers, what it's like to raise capital and things like that. He constantly helps out the little guy and brings him up as far as he can. So a very humble guy, especially driving a Hyundai along the way.
Yeah, love that he's driving a Hyundai. So Ian, thanks so much for coming on the show. If you're listening and you got this far, please leave us a rating, a review. It totally helps us big time in getting this word out there to as many people as possible. And, we will see you all next week.
See y'all later.
That's it for this episode of Investify. We hope that these nuggets of real estate wisdom lead to more savvy financial planning and a clearer path towards financial freedom. For more content like this, subscribe to the show at investify.com. Don't forget to leave a rating and share it with your friends. Together, we can transform more real estate newbies into successful and clever investors. Thank you so much for listening. See you on the next one.